It's the 25th of February 2022. Welcome everybody. Hope you're doing good on this Friday. I'm Dana Durnford. I'm also known as the Nuclear Proctologist.org. And you can call in at 709-589-4406. 709-589-4406. And don't say you didn't have a chance. Okay, so we got Russia has captured Chernobyl. Nothing says, like, let's go to nuclear war, like starting in a nuclear wasteland does. So that's what they basically demonstrated. We got a poll tonight. Will NATO attack Russia? And we have a resounding no. I don't know. I'm not Russia. I don't know. I'm not NATO. Just asking the question. I'll give you my opinion in the form of a sonnet. Let's get it on here. Okay, so they got radiation levels have risen by 20 times what's considered average, and that's because of a lot of traffic. You got to realize how much radiation came out of Chernobyl. We're going to cover that for you tonight to try to give you an actual proper perspective on it. If NATO comes in, they'll be bringing the A-10 Warthogs. They only shoot dirty bombs. And so the question now is, did the radiation levels rise because Russia is using depleted uranium munitions? There's 450 dead, and they weren't sitting outdoors. They were sitting in machines mostly that you would use the depleted munitions on. And these are obviously not depleted, but that's the great fable, right? Always takes me a few moments to get up to crap speed. E equals MC squared is crap. Crap is radioactive fallout constantly on our planet already, right? So it always takes a couple minutes to get up to running speed. My apologies. This is supposed to be my day off, because nuclear is in the background. We've got to have a conversation about it, all six of us. You know, I've only been doing the nuclear show for about a decade, 5 days a week, and I got a whole 6 people on my show. That's pretty amazing. A couple of them will be trolls from the nuclear industry. How's it going, trolls? You got to treat nuclear like it's a meteorite coming at the planet. Unfortunately, they just made a movie called Climate Change instead, but climate change is radioactive fallout. Consider putting them in your bookmarks, and if you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell. I don't think the bell works, but consider it. So, good morning, good day, good evening to everybody worldwide, wherever you're tuned. Apologize, I'm on YouTube, but it's the best streaming site on the planet. Give us a thumbs up. It won't make a difference, but pisses off the industry. There's many social sharing network sites out there. YouTube is not a very good one. So the Hulk and Spider-Man were created by the nuclear industry, so it makes it harder for you to understand what I'm trying to show you. It was the indoctrination machine. So all superheroes basically were created to confuse you, except for that one there. Let's get on with it, Dana. Stop this now. I know, because you got so many superheroes. Putin's one too, by the way. Okay, so let's get it over with. Chernobyl. Chernobyl. Those were the good old days. So this was a 200-ton reactor. Chernobyl reactors were a new reactor, and it didn't have any spent fuel pool, so it was a 200-ton, mostly graphite, which is different than, say, Fukushima, which is pure uranium, pure plutonium. But the biggest byproduct out of the fuel, and that was the alleged curium. They're trying to convince everybody that this is 200 tons. Well, behind it is where somebody can lean on the rail. Does that look like a 200-ton, 200 one-ton pickup trucks to you right there? And then if you actually, this is a fake picture of Chernobyl's reactor core. If you actually done that, first off, your camera won't work. And not because you did, but yeah, you did. But because your camera won't work in that environment. So it's easy to Photoshop somebody in there. I actually Photoshopped myself in there. I can't tell the difference. Can you tell the difference? And when you put me on the fake one, which is both of us, I guess, neither one is real. So they abandoned all of these equipment because of radiation. A lot of those helicopters were only used one time. It gives you a context of what radiation does. Just these neutron gamma shines, X-ray bursts. The metal is radiated, not from actual dust per se, but yeah, there is dust, or you couldn't avoid it. But from the actual gamma shines, neutron bursts, and X-rays from the curium. The biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rods is curium. Not cesium, like they're trying to convince you, but curium. And curium, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you would for plutonium. And plutonium was named after the devil. That one's not supposed to be there. 600 pilots died. That's one of them right there. Pilots. Officially, only 36 people died, but 600 helicopter pilots died, according to documentaries and Harvard University. Under 3% of the children exposed to Chernobyl radiation in the room were diagnosed as healthy at age 7. Under 3%. Okay, so the 118 Ukraine military assets destroyed. So they're not playing games. There's 450 Ukrainian soldiers dead, because that's what good soldiers do. They die, right? So there's 118 assets, and they got a basic list of these assets. Is quite telling. 11 Ukrainian air bases, 13 command facilities, 36 air defense radars, 14 air defense missile systems, 5 warplanes, 18 tanks, and warships, whatever that means. So if the 18 tanks, you're going to be using depleted uranium munitions on those bad boys. And because a lot of those equipment that they're using only shoot depleted uranium, the less shooting, the better. They lost over 450 personnel, which tells us now they're in a nuclear wasteland. It's a nuclear wasteland. And if you breathe it in, it sequesters in your muscles, your organs, and your bones immediately. Your body attacks it immediately with white blood cells for the rest of your life. And it tries to build a tumor around it. That could take a decade or 2 or 3 decades. But your body attacks it with white blood cells immediately. That displaces the red blood cells in your body. The red blood cells carry oxygen and nutrition throughout your body. So there's an actual instant cause and effect from breathing in radioactive particles, or drinking it, or eating it. And in the military case, they're breathing it in and consuming it other ways. They can't avoid it. Okay. And so the effects are not going to be immediate. They're going to be 5, 10, 15 years down the road. If nothing else happens, they're just there breathing it in regularly. It'll start showing up down the road. And it'll also show up if they try to have children and stuff like that. But for the rest of their life, they have less red blood cells, which means they have less oxygen in their body, less nutrition, which means become lazy and lethargic because of that. And eventually, there's up to 1,800 illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries and illnesses that can manifest before cancer. Cancer is late. There's heart problems, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, schizophrenia. There's an incredible host of illnesses and diseases will show up before cancer does that could kill you long before cancer manifests or is diagnosed. So Ukraine says a declaration of war against the whole of Europe. Hey, NATO, come get my ass out of trouble is what he's saying. Now, the reason we got the poll for NATO is because Russia is gone into Ukraine because of NATO. They're not there because they don't like Ukraine. They're there because Ukraine is going to fall to the globalists. And NATO is 30 military countries. I'll explain NATO coming up in a moment when we get to it. Okay. Chernobyl disaster cause, and of course they're going to blame. This is about protecting the nuclear industry, that particular article. Summary: effects on humans, effects on the environment. So right now there's an absurd amount of stories coming out about Chernobyl. This is just pure propaganda. And it's meant to thoroughly indoctrinate any of the population that is trying to work out what's going on. And unfortunately, if you don't find me, you're going to be fed incredible amounts of atomic plague diarrhea. We like to call it verbal diarrhea from the nuclear industry. This is a picture of Chernobyl. They say it had a partial meltdown, but it actually expelled the reactor core, which is why it was so bad. The world's worst nuclear disaster, that's not true. It's a 200-ton reactor. Fukushima has 4 reactors that melted down, were 800 tons each. That's 3,200 tons versus 200 tons. Unfortunately, at Fukushima in Japan, each reactor building had 2 fuel pools at the top of the building that had decades of reactor cores in them because you don't have a repository. Estimated to be 10 million pounds at the top of each building. So it's significantly more. But Chernobyl was brutal, don't get me wrong. But this is the propaganda you're going to run into, and every single paper will say the same words. The world's worst nuclear power disaster. Pew. Chernobyl's disaster effects on humans. How did the Chernobyl disaster affect humans? Psychological effects, really. Resulted in suicides, alcohol abuse, and apathy. That's the strangest one, by the way. I've never heard of that from radiation fallout before. And nor did I. There's suicides and alcohol abuse, but no illnesses from radiation, no mutations. We'll challenge that coming up. So the soldiers from Russia are in Ukraine itself in pajamas. And that's not going to protect you from radioactive fallout in that area. Emergency workers, people living in contaminated areas, receive relatively low whole body radiation doses, according to the study by 193 militaries known as United Nations, who uses an awful lot of depleted uranium munition themselves. So that's not true. This is the roof of Chernobyl's nearest building, and these workers there were only working for 25 seconds, and then they went home and never went near a nuclear site again. And that's enough to give you a brutal, life-changing dose, by the way. They made their own lead vest with rope and wires and strapped it onto each other. Now here's a radioactive fallout model. I'm going to speed it up from Chernobyl. It covers the planets. The model that you're looking at stops after so many days, but the radiation never stopped. And I'll show you a bunch of studies so you can kind of... Okay, so the radiation probably doesn't mean much. What does that mean, Dana? Well, it means you got an invisible plume of very dangerous isotopes with a longevity of hundreds of thousands of years, the radiation fallout. And let's keep it going. Resuspension around Chernobyl. These studies are meant to give you a real perspective. These are academic studies, and we're going to just run through them. This is not difficult for people to wrap their mind around, but it's not easy to see this stuff. A lot of this stuff is very scary and intimidating and hurtful, but it's the truth. And mainstream media is not going to ever, under any circumstances, show you some of this stuff. The influences of post-Chernobyl fallout on birth defects and abortion rates in Austria. So it doesn't just affect the local area, it affects other countries. Homefuls of grossly deformed children we have ever seen in the history of pediatrics all around Chernobyl are homes of abandoned children. Now, Chernobyl nuclear accident changed the human sex ratio in Europe, in France, and in the United Kingdom, and blah, 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 blah. And what that means is there's more males than females being born, which means less population. But in order for that to happen, you had to poison every human in Europe to have that effect. Not only that, if you'd done that, you had to also then now poison with radiation every species, all the insects, all the birds, all the animals, and all the mammals. You can't just poison humans. It doesn't work that way. This legacy, as far as you can see, of very expensive equipment abandoned because of radiation. So the previous story was saying, oh no, there was hardly any damage, just low damages. They didn't abandon all this equipment. And these, like I say, these helicopters were maybe used once or twice. They were so radioactive, just sitting on them without flying anymore would give you a deadly dose. All 600 of the helicopter pilots died. All 600. Prenatal loss to 400 male fetuses in the Czech Republic. A non-thyroid cancer, once again, there's 1,800 illnesses and diseases. It's not just cancer. Even though most of the studies only talk about cancer, that's not an accident. When you see these types of pictures, these are the Chernobyl workers. There was 670,000 that they admit to. Apparently there was over 1 million workers conscripted. That the government was using buses with soldiers and would go into the cities and jack people off the side of the road, adults and males. Get on the bus at gunpoint, take you to Chernobyl, and get your deadly dose. The congenital abnormalities, which is children are born with deformed hearts and they create these incredible host of other illnesses. Congenital abnormality registry in Belarus, a tool for assessing the public health impact of Chernobyl. But as you go through these studies, and I mean, you're talking about orphanages after orphanages after orphanages of abandoned children, they don't even have color televisions, let alone televisions. Russia got all kinds of money for weapons, but they won't donate color television. I hope Russia goes and captures all the orphanages too, in that case. Maybe the children will finally get TVs to watch. Fallout from the Chernobyl accident and overall cancer. Again, you see him concentrating on cancers. None of the 600 helicopter pilots who died of cancer. They died of severe organ failures. Down syndrome time clustering linked with Chernobyl in Belarus. Now, all you got to do is go to all the orphanages, and that's pretty obvious in true academic studies. See? It's the hidden side of the bizarre nuclear industry. Chernobyl fallout prenatal mortalities in England and Wales in the United Kingdom. In fact, they closed 9,000 farms in Ireland and Scotland, United Kingdom. They might as well close them all. The radiation didn't randomly radiate 9,000 farms one at a time. So the whole country and the whole of Europe was radiated for that to happen. 400 are still closed today. Chromosome aberration, Norwegian deer following the Chernobyl because of radioactive fallout. The influences of Chernobyl on birth defects and abortion rates. Excuse me again. Estimated lifetime effective doses to hunters and their families in the 3 most contaminated counties in Sweden after Chernobyl. Sweden. In fact, Sweden closed their freshwater lakes for 30 years to fishing, to any kind of commercial fisheries, because of radiation. Incidences of legal abortion in Sweden after Chernobyl. Chernobyl resulted in 985,000 deaths worldwide in 2004. And that was because there was 50,000 or 5,000 studies were translated by the New York Medical Institute, I can't remember the exact place, and was turned into a basic book. It showed over 985,000 people had died. But that's because there's 1,800 illnesses and diseases that industry has hid away from you. Legally induced abortions in Denmark after Chernobyl. They were going around killing all the animals and reindeer and cows and sheep. Pregnancy outcome in Finland after Chernobyl. Why are they doing studies in all of these places? So then they're claiming now that the soldiers at Ground Zero are okay, but yet everybody else worldwide was brutally affected. The Chernobyl core is still melting down into the earth, says Mikko Kaku, a famous physicist from the United States. May still yet hit the groundwater and create a steam explosion, which would split the earth, like at Chernobyl, and the steam coming out of the ground at around 10 sieverts per hour is a lethal dose, where Fukushima actually disappears under steam for months at a time. The cover-up is unbelievable. Delayed effects of accidental radiation exposure, 15 years of follow-up after Chernobyl. You can see all the people in the studies, these studies. You know why no one lives at Chernobyl? Because it's not safe, right? Well, it's not really safe to be living in England or Ireland or Scotland, according to the studies we got, or Norway, or Denmark, or Sweden, or Finland, etc., etc. Pregnancy outcome in Norway after Chernobyl. So when you see these studies, they're not burning all that money for something to do. They're trying to cover up what happened in those countries. They're not trying to tell you the truth. They're trying to downplay it. They got to acknowledge it, but they're going to downplay it. Early infant mortality in West Germany before and after Chernobyl. Ionizing radiation, human gender proportions at birth, a concise review of the literature and complementary analysis of historical and recent data. And again, these helicopters were flown once or twice and then abandoned because of radiation. That's how it actually works. Chernobyl cover-up is appropriately. These helicopters, you see, they're spraying a reagent that binds with the radioactive hot particles and brings them down to the ground. That's the theory. Radioactive fallout neural tube defects for children. This is going to be true for animals and insects and birds too. It's not just going to be humans. Every study you see for a human is applicable to the animal kingdom too. Global implications of Chernobyl. Global implications of Chernobyl. global. Why are they suggesting a global implication? Because like coal, oil, and gas emissions don't circle the planet. Radiation is the only one that does that. It might take 10, 20, 30 years to rain out with a single event. The potential for disease initiated by inhaling beta and emitting nuclear particles, and alpha, and gamma, and neutrons, uranium, plutonium, etc. Not just beta. That's how it works, though. Infant mortality after Chernobyl. Look at all the people doing the study. Got to make a paycheck. They make a big paycheck for many, many months doing these studies. You really think they abandoned all the helicopters because radiation is harmless? Pregnancy outcome in Sweden after Chernobyl. Orphanage after orphanage after orphanage of abandoned children because of Chernobyl. And they got nothing. They got maybe one caretaker for 30 or 40, and the majority of the children are unbelievably disfigured. Effects of the accident of Chernobyl atomic energy plant on the outcome of pregnancy. All of these studies. And see, Homer Simpson was created to indoctrinate you and your friends and your families and your loved ones and your children. To deceive and manipulate you, coerce you into promoting nuclear. Dental abnormalities in people living in radionuclide contaminated regions. If you look at Britain, and you look at Sellafield nuclear meltdown in 1957, the fact that there's 8 million liters a day going into the Atlantic Ocean from Sellafield, you can actually trace the bad teeth down there to that fallout. Chernobyl liquidators health disasters, right? Abnormal retinal pigment. A major termination, radiation-induced congenital eye defects, along with all the other defects. Leukemias after iodine-131 exposure from Chernobyl. This report here was a Russian TV reporting on Fukushima. Says that Fukushima reactors are 100 times more volume of pure materials than Chernobyl. Chernobyl's brutal, don't get
the fact that the reactor in Japan is 100 times more powerful than the one in Chernobyl. The fact that the reactor in Japan is 100 times more powerful than the one in Chernobyl. And in fact, the two stations, the two power plants in the Fukushima region produced the world's biggest joint amount of energy. And this means, of course, that this reactor, which is under threat now, is far more powerful than the one in the fourth block of the Chernobyl nuclear power station, which exploded 25 years ago.
So 100 times more powerful each reactor. And the Dining and the Diachi were the biggest producers on the planet of energy at that time. And Chernobyl was a 200-ton reactor. Each of the Fukushima reactors were 800 tons. But don't get me wrong, Chernobyl is brutal. Effects of radiation on the reproductive system. Whenever you see these pictures, these are abandoned children in orphanages currently in Ukraine and Belarus because of Chernobyl. Prenatal radiation-induced brain cognitive impairments from radiation. There's one of the worst jobs you can get, spraying reagents on trucks leaving the hot zone. Down syndrome in Scotland after Chernobyl. Or radiation, rather. Schizophrenia in the aftermath of Chernobyl. Because the children now are born with incredible debilitating illnesses. And these people had no concept. They were conscripted to work there. You go there, you get shot. Human sex ratio at birth after atmospheric weapons testing. So the study suggests that the male to female ratio was changed worldwide because of nuclear bomb testing. The radioactive fallout affected the entire population of the planet. That has to be true also for the animal world. It can't just be humans, see? It's a terrible, 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 hideous legacy nuclear has. Most people have no concept Fallout from the Chernobyl accident, forest soil, its impact on the alpine lakes in France. Chernobyl affected everything and everybody. Resuspension, redistribution, radionuclides during grassland and forest fires in the Chernobyl. Because you can't destroy the radiation. All you can do is liberate it back into the environment. Even incinerating it at 3,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures does nothing to it. Whatever its life cycle is, it will live it out. It's a perpetual misery machine. You didn't abandon these entire cities because of a partial meltdown. Trust me. It was a full-on, they ejected the reactor core right out of the building. But the mainstream media out there right now telling you it was a partial meltdown. So Russia's in a nuclear wasteland. I mean, that sends a message. We're not worried about radioactive fallout. Now, if you remember the last couple of weeks, there's been a lot of talk about nuclear weapons, including from Putin. Both of his parents worked for Stalin. His father in the military, his mother as a nurse. And you can imagine being a nurse in the Stalin era. Imagine how many amputations you would have done, for starters. So he's the perfect Manchurian candidate for the global war machine, right? He was desensitized to it before he was born. A highly radioactive Chernobyl deposits in the Scandinavian glaciers. Highly radioactive means it's going to be highly radioactive in 100,000 years. And so when the mainstream media is out there telling you that it's not very bad anymore, this is absolutely nonsense. This is just because your media is now a lobbyist for the industry, for the military. The Pentagon has 29,000 lobbyists, for goodness sakes. That's all they do. They're military employees, but they get on a phone and everything else, and they're lobbyists. They contact all the magazines, all the newspapers across the entire country, and they have them all on their Rolexes, all in their emails. And when they say jump, the media doesn't come back down to earth until they tell them to. Thyroid cancers in children and adults north of England because of Chernobyl, they're asking. In England. Fallout disposition of Monaco because of Chernobyl. Fallout New York because of, you guessed it, Chernobyl. Soil plant transfer of plutonium and americium in contaminated regions of Belarus after Chernobyl. Soil plant transfer of hot particles like plutonium and americium, very long-lived particles. That should worry the shit out of you because you eat food, right? 137 cesium, 134 cesium, 90 strontium in Syria mountains after Chernobyl accident. These people were getting lethal doses. That's why they were putting these handmade lead shields on them. Tropospheric and stratospheric distribution of radioactive iodine and cesium after. So when they talk about radioactive iodine and cesium, they're not being honest. The biggest byproduct of radiated fuel is going to be curium, which is 20 times more lethal than plutonium. And that's the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rods. The idea of using iodine and cesium, if you go back, and we do, we've covered tens of thousands of academic studies here, and almost 98% of it is going to be on cesium and iodines. And even though the reactors run on uranium plutonium, the biggest byproduct is the curium isotopes. Whenever you see these helicopters, you'll notice they're spraying reagent to bind with the radiation and try to knock it out of the sky. Concentrations of radiocesium in Italian wheat. And of course, what do you use wheat for? All kinds of products, right? Doses from the Chernobyl accident to the Nordic population via diet intake. So all of these studies, the question you got to ask yourself is, why are they doing studies on those subjects for? And if you watched all of this, what you realize, hopefully, and appropriately, is that this stuff gets into everything. And it's going to be there for thousands of years. Environmental study of radioactive cesium. Again, when cesium is meant to distract you, manipulate you, and it's bad, don't get me wrong, it's a gamma. But I'm worried about the beta and the neutrons. Because that's what you're supposed to be worried about. This is meant to deceive you, manipulate you, and trick you. So whenever you see cesium, you got to multiply it by 1,000 different isotopes that are going to be in the same sample. It's a despicable industry. The entire industry is a lunatic, crazy industry. These people were on the roof for 25 to 30 seconds. And then he went home and never went back. You're talking a brutal dose just to get out there. Radioactivity from 137 in plant drugs. So your fields that are growing crops for plants becomes radioactive. You get your drugs at the pharmacy, but they're actually radioactive chemo drugs. And they ain't going to make you better. That's why they abandon these communities. Because you bioaccumulate it really quickly. Time-dependent transport of Chernobyl radioactivity between the atmosphere and then found in eastern Canada. It's not going to be just in lynching. If it's in that, it's going to be in everything else too. It can't just be in one thing. Potassium fertilization, 137 cesium transfer from soil to grass and barley in Sweden. From soil to grass and barley. Then you need another study for uranium and plutonium and americium, neptunium and strontium and curium and all their byproducts and daughters. This helicopter actually fell into the reactor. They got such a big dose. This is why these helicopters were only used once or twice before they were abandoned forever. The transport of Chernobyl-derived radiocesium through freshwater lakes in the United Kingdom, which meant all your fresh water was contaminated in all of Europe, and you shouldn't be drinking water in Europe because a stupid power plant in Chernobyl broke down. Would anybody consent to having a creature like that on their planet if you knew better? Do you think I'm being censored tonight because I don't know what I'm talking about? Do you think all of these studies are wrong? In fact, my poll tonight, hi everybody, my poll tonight should have been, should NATO attack Russia? Not will NATO attack Russia. Should NATO attack Russia? Get it over with, because we're in the big reset. This is the reset, and we expected a war, and Russia going into a nuclear wasteland and setting up shite up their site is saying, hey, we're not worried about a nuclear war. You don't say it any clearer than that. And going in and killing 450 people and taking out huge military of their militaries, 11 of their Air Force bases, they're playing patty cakes. This is real as it gets. They're completely out of control. And so nobody hold them accountable. All the other crimes they've been doing for the last couple of decades. We're talking about NATO. We're talking about United Nations. We're talking about subsidiaries like the International Atomic Energy Agency, the World Health Organization, the World Banks, the World Trade Organizations, how insidious and evil and corrupt they have been. There's no checks and balances, so there's no incentive not to be evil. And when you got these people with $1 trillion budget, with no incentive not to be evil, what do you think is going to happen? Radiation doses in countries in the Northern Hemisphere from the Chernobyl nuclear reactor accident. Radiation doses in countries of the Northern Hemisphere from Chernobyl. So if you think Chernobyl, having a war over there, is not going to affect you in the Northern Hemisphere, you are sadly mistaken. It affects every insect, every bird, every animal, every mammal, every human on the entire planet when it comes to nuclear, because of the fallout. That's how it actually works. And because there's so much of it. Like the numbers are absurd we're talking about of atomic radiation. You can see my Geiger counter up there. That's counts per minute, believe it or not, in the studio. It's absurd numbers. You think that the nuclear industry leaves these children abandoned and decrepit orphanages like this because the nuclear industry has some redeeming qualities? You think the nuclear industry is not savages? Because you're going to be some kind of savage to let that happen. The nuclear industry could have took care of these children a long time ago. And they refused to. They live in complete, utter destitute and poverty, with nobody to speak for them. The fallout of Chernobyl's radioactivity in central Ontario, Canada. The reason I came out with the show tonight is because I know there's nobody else on the planet going to come out and show you this. Nobody. No university, no academics, no professors, no companies, no corporations. No other academic of any other discipline is going to come out and try to have this conversation. An honest one. The grazing economy in North Wales in the wake of the grazing economy of the United Kingdom because of Chernobyl is in jeopardy. And he stole the data, and abandoned the communities and said there's nothing wrong. Australia was radioactive. The agricultural in Canada trying to justify that it was safe to eat it, and he done a study saying, yeah, no, it's safe, but it's not. How can it be? Intellectual development, mental and behavioral disorders in children from Belarus exposed in the womb following Chernobyl. The people were bringing it home and they're washing their clothes and their children's clothes and the children. So there's many different ways their children grew up and then had deformed babies. Radioactivity in milk consumed in Nigeria 10 years after Chernobyl. 10 years later, still radioactive cows throughout Nigeria. Chernobyl victims are not mere objects of research. They actually had to do a study to remind the academics that humans are humans, not just objects for the nuclear industry to poke needles into. Inhalation of radionuclides during agricultural work in areas contaminated as a result of... That's the strangest study in human history, by the way. Inhalation of radionuclides during agricultural work. So you had to do a study to justify growing food in a radioactive nuclear wasteland. You had to do another study to justify the workers working in the radioactive wasteland growing food. And then another studies to justify eating the food grown in a nuclear wasteland. All by the International Atomic Energy Agency's United Nations approved. To downplay and misrepresent every facet of it. That's the legacy, isn't it? Fallout and radiation doses in Norway following Chernobyl. Radiation protection in Poland because of Chernobyl. Downward migration of radiocesium in Scotland because of Chernobyl. Who is NATO? NATO's 30 countries. It's an intergovernmental military. Intergovernmental. That's where all the militaries get together and creates a great big gang. Russia's not scared of no gang. Because Russia is a gang. Russia is the gangster themselves. Alliance between 28 European countries, 2 North American countries. Established after, in the radioactive fallout of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the North Atlantic Treaty was signed on the 4th of April, 1949. It constitutes a system of collective security, aka bullies, whereby an independent member state agrees to mutually defend in response to an attack by an external party. So if you attack one of the NATO, you're attacking all of them. Thereby proxy now, they can be bullies. There's no incentive for them not to be bullies now. It's the stupidest thing we've ever done. We took away the fear factor. Since its founding, the mission of new member states has increased the legions from the original 12 countries to 30 countries. To 30 countries. And members agree their aim is to reach and maintain the target. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, the Chairman of NATO Military Committee, Admiral Rob Bauer, the Royal Netherlands Navy, the Supreme Allied Commander from the United States Air Force, and the Supreme Allied Commander from the French Air and Space Force. Space Force. France got a Space Force? And their budget is over $1 trillion. This is a monster. NATO's a big friggin' monster, yeah? Ukraine says Russia radiation levels exceeded as the Russians confirmed its forces seized a nuclear plant. Taking a nuclear plant as the first move on the chessboard is a pretty telling tale. It says, nothing says we're ready to go to nuclear war than setting up shop in a nuclear wasteland, does it? And I mean, they went in and they killed 450 people that we know about. So you can be sure it's probably double that. Ukraine government is saying radiation levels are gone up. That could be from the depleted uranium munition. Russia would have used the DU for sure, right, to destroy the tanks and the aircrafts and the airfields, etc., and the warships. Why did the Russian troops seize control of the Chernobyl? Well, it's the shortest route to the capital of Ukraine. This is not a war against Ukraine. It's a war against NATO, right? Ukraine is just a little pawn. They just walked through Ukraine. It was nothing to it. 450 dead. Job well done. Let's set up the tents. So you can't call Chernobyl the world's worst nuclear accident. It's the world's maybe second worst nuclear accident. It's a bad one, but it ain't nothing compared to Fukushima. It's absurd to suggest it, but all of the media says the same sentence over and over and over. Does it make it right? No. Authorities have reported high levels. So, like there's, when you have droughts there, the dust is highly radioactive. When you have forest fires anywhere around Chernobyl, within 1,000 miles of it, it's high-level radiation going into all the communities where the smoke ends up. We've seen that, right? There's lots of documentation of that. So going in there and setting up shop, to me, I don't know about anybody else, but somebody that's studying this for years and years and years, and I covered Chernobyl heavily on each anniversary, and any other stories during the entire year, breaking stories, I'm all over it. And so I think I have a unique, proper perspective on this. I'm not here to try to sing, song, and dance anybody. I'm here telling you facts. I'm telling you what's up. And they're getting after it. That's what's up. They got 450 dead. They flattened all the bases. They flattened all the radars. I mean, come on, right? That's a brilliant move to go into a nuclear wasteland. It's hard to attack them in a nuclear wasteland. And it's never been done before. We've never seen a nuclear wasteland taken over before, right? So it's a really difficult one. How does NATO attack Ukraine? They can't basically attack them without the whole planet being frightened to death. They're running around in their pajamas. There's nobody going to oppose them, really. Anybody that does is going to get squat. And so the only card left on the table is NATO. That's not a very good card for anybody else on this planet. NATO is happy to oblige them, don't get me wrong. NATO wants to oblige them. They would love the Third World War. Then the governments now, they can't be taken out of office. They have unlimited spending power. And they're so corrupt, we know how that's going to end up. We're in the moment of the Great Reset on top of that. This is what you would expect to happen. But that's amazing to go into the Chernobyl nuclear wasteland and take that place. Never saw that coming. I was looking at this, watching this. That wasn't what I expected. There was, well, it was the quickest, straightest route there. But it's a brilliant move, I thought. When it comes to, if you're going to be evil, might as well go all the way, and they did. The UN Atomic Agency says radiation. Now, the United Nations is 193 militaries. Russia's not one of them. And they're known as, according to George Bush Sr., I'll play the clip for you. George Bush Sr. had a weird pet name for him. What was George Bush's pet name for the United Nations? Hang on. Let's play the clip. I'll put it on the big screen for you. I'll adjust the audio for you.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order. A world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
Well, they got to Chernobyl because it's a perfect base. It's hard to attack them in a nuclear wasteland. And it's the straightest route there. Well, whose move is it? Do you think Ukraine is going to attack Russia and take back Chernobyl? Because that's absurd. That's not going to happen. They want Ukraine because they don't want NATO to take over, which is taking over Ukraine as we talk about it. And that's why they stepped in. They're not there for something to do. They're not there because they're exercise. They're not there because they're bored. They're not there because they're having a bad day and they want to go out and do drills. They're there and they killed a lot of people to get there. Now they're just a very short distance. They're a sprint. Excuse the whistle there, but they're a sprint away from the capital. from the government's ground zero. Now, what I'm saying tonight is, what's next? Well, if you look at it theoretically, then NATO steps in and starts a war. Because it's NATO's move. Russia made the first move and stomped Ukraine's guts out, and Ukraine gave up the ghost. Ukraine said, okay, we had enough. They're like the French. They're like, hey, no more for us. We got beat up. We get it. So now if NATO is serious, now if not, then you're going to have Russia on NATO's doorstep. Right? Because you're at a turning point. That's the corridor, the last corridor, and who gets it. It's going to be an interesting shouting match coming up, that's for sure. Listen, they killed 450 people, took over 11 air bases, sunk ships, destroyed tanks and aircrafts. That's a declaration of war. And Ukraine can't fight them back, or they would have. Ukraine just got slapped aside, pushed aside like they didn't even exist. Russia says Chernobyl is fine. We'll have to take Russia's word, will we? The Ruskies' word. Why is Chernobyl nuclear power plant important? Because it's the straightest route there. There are bigger atomic worries than Chernobyl in Ukraine. That's right, there's 15 reactors there. But that's the route in. And most of Ukraine is abandoned, so it's a safe place for the military to have a staging place. Taking over 11 bases means they can land their planes there and weapons and be ready to launch. It's a significant move. They're waiting out, or is NATO going to wait until they move forward and then attack? Or is NATO going to stand down and let Russia just go in and take over Ukraine? Let's say Russia pulls out, because that doesn't make any sense, but let's say they do. You think Ukraine really wants Chernobyl back? Any idea what kind of a nightmare that place is? And then all the media is out with the stupidest headlines, and when you read the stories, full of propaganda and misrepresentations and lies and deceit and deception. Yeah? That's what we're seeing. That's all the radiation detecting units around Chernobyl. Well, I don't have the answer of what's going to happen, but I can tell you one thing. Russia's not playing around. Russia's not playing any games with anybody. Okay. Hi, everybody. Well, we'll be keeping an eye on everything. This was a broadcast to get some documentation out there. Let's have a conversation. I picked up $540 in sockets and a few other tools that I've been putting off forever. And the price is, there's been a sale, so I went ahead and bought it. And because we got 9 motors, we got boats, and 3 trailers, and quads, and bikes, and blah, 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 blah. We got the studio, we got so much equipment, it makes me sick, and the truck, and can't afford any of it. Can't afford to get any of it fixed when it breaks either. And so without the tools, I'm dead in the water. I got to come up with ways to pay mechanics all the time. And I can't keep the operation moving forward and the research expeditions moving forward constantly throwing money at mechanics every time something goes wrong. So we dump the money into the tools. Hopefully we have no breakdowns, but at least we got tools to work with, right? I hope. Anyway, it's done, and I'm happy it's done. I wouldn't have done it unless there was a sale, right? There's so many things and expenses to cover. You can't keep up with everything. But I think that's good news, right? That we got the tools, because that will save a lot of money each year. But I'm going to bust up my knuckles. That can't be good. There's links below to my merchandise. You can go buy some shirts or mugs or face masks or blankets or bags to support this operation, these research expeditions and everything else that we do. And we're doing for many, many years. And these live presentations and all the equipment is just... I might not make it back until Monday, because I gotta have a couple of days off. Not that I actually get a couple of days off, but you gotta take a couple of days downtime just to get everything else accomplished. And because this is such a hot topic, I'm worried sick about how this could play out because of the nuclear side. Hi everybody, good night everybody. Peace, where catch Dana Nasana, Robert Ayers. Good night, everybody. Nancy, a little quick shout out to everybody. Well, nothing makes sense, but never would have thought Russia would take Chernobyl. That don't make any sense, but it does when you think about if they're serious. It makes sense, and I guess they're serious. James Lucid, hey buddy. Thinker, good night everybody. Angelica, Salamander, I hear you, I know. But it's better to have someone like me out there telling the truth, because the truth carries more weight than the lies. Pseudovac Shredders, Blue Jay Outpost, Ease. Yeah, we didn't. I mean, let's close the poll down. What was the poll do tonight? 35% thinks NATO might attack Russia, and 65% doesn't think so. I don't know myself. I got no idea. I'm asking. So it gives me an idea, kind of an idea. We'll end the poll. 49 votes, with 35% saying, yeah, they might very well attack them. I think because of the way that Russia's doing it, this is not going to go away. This is only going to get worse. Because that's a pretty strange route thing to do, is go take Chernobyl. That means business, see? And that gets the attention of the entire planet right away. You got everybody's attention. And the next move, as far as I can tell, is NATO's move. What is NATO going to do? Is it going to remain silent? Is it going to use its voice? Is it masking? Is it putting together a military response? Who knows? I'm pretty sure the next few days is going to be very telling. Andrew B. Hi, Andrew. Everybody, good night, everybody. Hugs for everybody. God bless everybody. See everybody on the next show. Unless there's breaking news, I'll take a couple of days off. God bless. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up, folks. This is Share. Take care.